Give it up for Gratitude Rising. Yay. What a beautiful song, an original. This is the first time you guys have performed it live. Yes, well,
I'm not nervous at all.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much. It is so good to be back. Hey, happy June, and what a beautiful day it is, huh? It's a beautiful thing that we can say it's a beautiful day, right? Weather-wise, it's just gorgeous. I must have said that 30 times to Tony just on the short drive over here this morning. I was like, it's so beautiful out here. Yay, I love it. So we're in a new month, new theme. Let's all just take a moment and take a nice, long, deep breath. As we take in the month of June, we're actively growing through service. That's our theme for this month. Now, what does that really mean? Actively growing through service. Lots of different ways that can happen, right? There's so many ways that we can look at this topic. You know, we personally grow through the acts of service that we do as a personal individual. We grow through our acts of service that we do here in the center and in our community and in the greater world. And we grow in consciousness. So there's all kinds of levels of that taking place as well. So there's growth taking place internally and there's growth taking place externally, and it's all kind of blended together, and it creates a better world, doesn't it? When we actively grow through service. One of the ways that we are actively growing through service, which is an example, is that last year was the first time that we had representation at Denver Pride Fest. Super happy, super proud of that as a center and as a community, especially here in Castle Rock. And we marched in the parade with our big old banner, and I can't tell you how many people from the sidelines throughout the entire parade showed their enthusiastic support that there was a center from Castle Rock marching in this parade. Because I had discovered after coming here and being a part of the Interfaith Alliance in Denver that Castle Rock somehow had this reputation of being conservative. Can you believe that? I had no idea. Because it attracted me, though there isn't a conservative bone in my body, I don't think. I'm still looking for it. But so anyway, I've just totally embraced this notion that we're going to march in the parade, we're going to have a booth, and we're going to have a good time. And several of you showed up last year and worked it, and it was just a fabulous thing. And a lot opened up for us consciously through that experience, because we got to feel ourselves letting go of any idea or holding on to limitation and separation. Because, you know, that, folks, is another example of what we experience, another result of what we experience when we actively grow through service. And so when we do this, we're actually laying a solid foundation of support for our next birthing and becoming, personally, and as a center, and as a community, and as a world. Can you all see that and feel that? That whenever we actively reach out and grow ourselves through service, we're laying this foundation for what's left, what's next, what's coming in the future. And I also want to point out, first of all, I usually greet you and say love and blessings to each and every one of you. Very happy to see all of you. And I'm very happy to welcome a couple of guests that we have with us this morning who have come all the way from England. And I really want to point out how incredibly special it is to me personally in my heart that they would be here. It's Reverend Mary and Juliet, her wife, from England. And Juliet serves on our Centers for Spiritual Living Leadership Council, and Reverend Mary's in to, I think, do some extra special work at home office for the next couple of weeks. Do I have that right? So can you guys just wave, and because everybody's, yeah. And for those of you who subscribe to the Science Mind magazine here in this community, which I know is pretty much all of you, right? Right, Tony? It's pretty much everybody. You'll notice that they are actually featured in this month's Science of Mind magazine. So if you haven't gotten to that article yet, I invite you to check out that article, and I definitely invite you after the service to give Juliet and Mary a very warm welcome from our beautiful community. And that's another area where we're actively growing through service. You know, Juliet's volunteering as a part of our councils of our head organization, and Mary's coming out to give of her service as well. And that's growing them individually, but it's also growing our organization as they provide their consciousness and grow that in a bigger way. You know, one of the ways that it lays the foundation when we actively grow through service is, I'll give you an example. When I was really young, just out of high school, going to college, I had an internship at a Fortune 100 company. I was in corporate finance. I did that for about 10 years. If you guys, a lot of people said I really just don't see that in you, but I did. Corporate finance, believe it or not. And I was literally, I think, the youngest person in this corporation when I was hired on as a permanent employee. And I was really feeling very intimidated. You know, and I'm not a shy person, but I was really intimidated with the role and with being in this corporate atmosphere. And back in that day, and this was early 90s, we actually had a dress code. You had to wear heels that were a certain height, if you can believe that. I mean, it was totally not me. And to be able to blend in, you know, this corporation gave a lot of money to the city of Louisville and the community and had this huge list of different ways that you could volunteer. And I decided, well, there we go. That's a way that I can reach out, maybe get to know some of my coworkers. I'm going to sign up for a couple of these areas to volunteer. And one of them was teaching physically handicapped people how to horseback ride and to be there for them. And it wasn't all physically. I mean, some of them had some mental challenges too, but most of them were physically handicapped people. And I loved that because I'd grown up with horses and I absolutely loved to ride horses. And I'm like, this is cool. But you know what happened is I grew so much from that experience because I got to second-handedly experience what happened to these folks when they got on the back of a horse. They weren't handicapped, you see. They were themselves, and the horse walked for them, and they maneuvered the horse with, you know, the pressure of their knees on the horse's sides, and they were able to guide the horse with the reins. And this whole explosion of who they really are took off when they were on the back of this horse because they had legs. And they could use their arms, and they could move in the direction that they wanted to move in. And it was really beautiful. And I learned a lot about that we are truly only handicapped to the extent that we allow society to teach us that we are handicapped. These folks that got on the back of the horse were no longer handicapped, and they weren't holding that in consciousness anymore either. And I learned so much about that as a young, early 20s person. So I actively grew through that service. Another thing I signed up for, because I was an avid reader my whole life, I would use the flashlight under the covers when I was growing up, when we were supposed to go to bed, and I wouldn't go to bed because there was a book that I just had to get through, and so I would read by flashlight most of my young years. Loved reading. Well, I found out through this long list of volunteer services that there was this opportunity to teach adults how to read. And I had no idea at that point that there were adults who didn't know how to read. And I thought, oh my God, because there's a whole other world out there when you can read. And I thought, wow, you know, it's like Christopher Columbus. You know, all these folks could be like Christopher Columbus and discover new lands, discover new territories. So I signed up to get trained for that, and I did that. And I learned so much from that experience that has served me throughout my life. And that is everybody that were there to be taught how to read. They were all older than me, and they all brought with them baggage. You know, there was a lot of shame with them that they couldn't read, and yet there was encouragement, and there was hope, and there was inspiration because they were showing up to learn how to read. And so we would turn it into this party, and we would play, and we would discover, and there was so much I learned about connecting with people in a way that I had never connected with them before. And so I grew, I learned, I became more of the person that I wanted to become. And so they taught me so much about life. So there's an example, another one, of how we can actively grow through service. Are you guys on top? Are you on board with me so far? Yep. Good. You know, this is a time of graduation and commencement speeches, and Jim Carrey last year did a fabulous commencement speech that I love to listen to, and he actually did it at this Ayurvedic center where the graduates were graduating from Ayurvedic medicine. And this is what he said. He said, the effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is. And I just want you to think about that for a minute. The effect that we have on others is the most valuable currency we have. And I can say that everything that I learned from those experiences as a very young lady, just going into adulthood, the effect that they had on me was huge. But I was willing to reach out. I had to go outside of my comfort zone, right? That's another thing that happens when we actively grow through service is we're being called to reach out and stretch. Like I like to really brag on one of our members here within the center. You know, he had never been to Pride Fest, really didn't know much about it, but last year he was one of the first to sign up because he's like, I'm going to go experience this new thing. He wasn't afraid. And he went and he grew and he learned from having this experience, and I got to have these wonderful talks with him afterwards. Isn't that cool? I mean, that's what life's really all about, isn't it? How we evolve and we stretch and we grow in that way. But there's something that happens, you know, when we actively grow through service. In order to actively grow, we kind of have to go into this realm that we don't know, right? Because that's where growth occurs. If we're in a realm that we do know, there's usually very little growth occurring. So it takes courage. It takes courage, and it takes this idea that we need to surrender to the unknown, right? You guys follow me? You know where I'm going there, right? So for some, this concept of surrender has negative connotations. I mean, even if you were to look it up in the dictionary, if you were to look the word up, surrender, it's full of all kinds of negative connotations. It's like talking about waving the white flag and surrendering and, you know, kind of giving up your power kind of thing. But that's not really the surrender that we're talking about this morning, because my talk title is Surrendering to Spirit. And it's really necessary to surrender to Spirit when we are choosing to actively grow through service. There's that going into the unknown and having courage that's got to take place. And so Webster defines surrendering as to give oneself up to the power of another, especially as a prisoner. Well, that's not really the surrendering that we're here to talk about this morning, is it? No. So a further definition begins more positively and even passionately, but doesn't exactly end all that great. It says abandon or devote as oneself entirely to something without restraint, reservation, or further resistance. Yet it quickly adds a cautionary example. The individual has surrendered himself to destructive ideologies. Why does it have to be destructive? Do we have to surrender ourselves to destructive ideologies? I don't think so. So there's this notion of spiritual surrender in my mind, in my opinion, that is quite different. Spiritual surrender is not about defeat. You don't ever feel defeated when you spiritually surrender. It's about acceptance. Think about spiritual surrender right now. Just go within and think about, what does that mean? What does that comprise? What makes up spiritual surrender to you personally? There is an aspect of acceptance there. There's an aspect of joy and of faith. You know, there's an aspect of ending any struggle that may be taking place. Not surrendering into a struggle, but it's ending a struggle in our lives and beginning our journey on a path more wonderful than we could possibly imagine. And so that's really what we're blending together here this morning, is how we can actively grow through service by spiritually surrendering and move into the unknown, knowing that there's this incredible explosion of greatness right around the next corner. And we do this, folks, on a minute-by-minute basis almost. I do. I don't know about you, but I do. I've got like 10 stories I could tell you just from what I experienced yesterday. What about you guys, huh? Marianne Williamson says in her book, A Return to Love, surrender means the decision to stop fighting the world and to start loving it instead. Is there anything in your world right now that you're fighting? Anything? Because I'm going to invite you to shift your energy into loving it instead. I'm going to invite you to surrender to love. You know, surrendering in spiritual connotation is a gentle nudge to relax, to feel the love in your heart, and to keep to that as your focus in every situation. That's the meaning of spiritual surrender. It's also admitting that we're not in control. It's getting ourselves out of the way and trusting a higher power to guide us. And you may think in this moment, wait a minute, what's this getting out of the way business? What's this giving over power to a higher power? I thought this teaching was all about it's done unto us as we believe and think and change your life kind of thing. Aren't we supposed to think and guide and direct and control this? Well, kind of. But you see, there's this beautiful thing that happens at this intersection. We do think. And it is important for us to be consciously aware so that we're aware of our beliefs and what we're holding in mind that then is causing, through the law of attraction, to attract those experiences into our life. Yes, we are to think and have awareness in that way. Yet, what about the how? What do we teach here about the how? Is the how up to us? Anybody? No. The how is not up to us. What happens when we start making the how up to us? What happens? It's kind of like knocking our heads against the wall, right? Over and over and over again. And then we got to get caught up with that, right? Actively caught up with that. Banging our head against the wall. The how, I got to figure this out. The how. Until we do what? Until we surrender. Yeah. You know, and sometimes that beckoning, sometimes that beautiful beckoning of spirit to surrender comes gently and beautifully and like a wonderful full drawn breath that we just exhale. And sometimes it comes more forcibly, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know about you, but maybe in my lifetime, I have been a slow study. You know, people talk about quick studies. Maybe I've been a slow study because I have to admit, most of the time in my life, when I've been gently asked to surrender, I haven't always picked up on that. But I tell you one thing I always pick up on, and it's those forcible requests to surrender. Yes, always. I'm right there. That's where I become a quick study. So we kind of need to move to learn to leave the how up to spirit, and that takes surrendering. And one thing that Mary Morrissey says is intellectual principle. You know, we can think, and she says it like this: are you standing in intellectual principle? Because a lot of times people like to stand quite clear and quite strong and quite confident in intellectual principle. It might look good or feel good or make you feel all peacockishly proud, but it's not going to get you anywhere. Intellectual principle tends to not get you anywhere. It's accessing the wisdom of our soul, that part that is connected, and receiving the guidance of the divine within that gets us places, that gets us where we want to go, that creates the vision, that brings us the miracle of our dream made manifest. There's a difference there, isn't there? Energetically, metaphysically, and physically. So spiritual surrender leads us to a life that is more joyful and abundant than we can ever dream, because it frees us from fear. It frees us from anger. It gives us answers to difficult dilemmas. It points us in the right direction. It does all of those things, despite us most of the time, because we generally fight it until we finally surrender. And then when we're no longer fighting it, it becomes really easy, doesn't it? How many of you guys have had that experience? Know what I'm talking about. It becomes easy. So letting the universe know what you want and working towards it and letting go of how it will come to pass is kind of what I'm talking about here with spiritual surrender, and also utilizing our thoughts and our beliefs and what we're holding in our conscious awareness to create the life that we want. Jim Carrey, in his speech, again said, your job is not to figure out how it's going to happen for you. Just open the door in your head And when it opens in life, walk through it. So I'm going to repeat that because it's beautiful. So we already talked and we already know and we're already on board that the how is not up to us, right? So Jim is saying, just open the door in your head. You see, you hold the thought, you hold the vision, you hold the dream, you hold the desire. So he says you open the door in your head, and when it opens up in life, because it will, right? It has no choice. Then walk through it. And just take a moment to feel yourself walking through that door. Take a moment to visualize that door in your life opening up and waltzing and dancing and skipping right through it, whatever that door is. He says, take a chance on faith. He says, hope? Screw hope, he says. Now, this is Jim Carrey. I can quote him. He says, screw hope. He says, hope walks through the fire. You don't want to do that. He says, faith leaps over the fire. So he says, take a chance on faith. Knowing who you are lies beyond your personality. And it's our personality that tends to hold ourselves in that intellectual principle. Banging our head against the wall over and over and over again until we're ready to what? Surrender. That's right. So Gary Zukav in Seat of the Soul says, take your hands off the steering wheel, be able to say to the universe, thy will be done, and allow your life to go into the hands of the universe completely. You know, I've had some really strange things happening in my life lately. I've never really been resonated with traditional religious teachings ever in my life. And lately, I've been coming into this understanding and awareness of what some of the teachings mean. It's really bizarre. In our Tuesday night class, Self-Mastery, the Emergence of the True Self, there is this one exercise that we did a couple of weeks ago, and after the exercise, all I could feel, all I thought, and we got to share a little bit afterwards, is I was like, I felt confirmation. And then it dawned on me, wow, I wonder if this is that confirmation thing that those traditional religions sometimes do. Think about that, confirmation. What does it take to have that confirmation? And then this other word that I'm realizing more of now is salvation. You know, those traditional religious, specifically Christian teachings is always talking about salvation. And have you know, I don't even like to repeat it because it's so not in my blood. But that salvation part is, and that's really what I'm touching on a little bit this morning too, is, you know, that's what that feels like to me, what Gary Zukav is saying there in Seat of the Soul. When you take your hands off the steering wheel and able to say to the universe, thy will be done, and allow your life to go into the hands of the universe completely, allow that spiritual surrender to take place, and then what happens, everything becomes easy, right? We already talked about that. That to me is salvation. I am saved by my ability to spiritually surrender to that which with me and the divine is far greater than anything I could possibly ever come up with as a solution on my own. And therefore I'm saved. Are you following me on that? Yeah. So that's just something I've just been playing with a little bit. So spiritual surrender is a little bit about praying, it's a little bit about letting go, and it's a little bit about listening. You see, there's those three things going on there. Prayer, let go, listen. You know, I was coaching somebody this week on something very similar that they were holding in their mind intellectually that it needed to be a certain way and it needed to show up a certain way. And they were holding this thing in mind so much and to this particular list of directions of how it was supposed to be that they were not feeling it. And in my opinion, in order for us to be truly successful, you know, truly successful, miraculously on top of the world, passionate, devoted, dynamic, all those things, is we've got to feel it, right? And if we constantly work at everything up here in our head and we never take it down to our heart and we never take it through to our divine connection with spirit, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to create a masterpiece. And a lot of times we struggle with that because now we're not willing to surrender to that connection. I don't know why. Sometimes I think we're afraid. Sometimes I think we avoid it at all costs because we're afraid of what's going to happen if we were to get in touch with our divine spiritual nature. Holy cow, can the world handle it, right? Can my marriage handle it, or can my best friends handle it, or can my work handle it? I'm sure they can. And if they can't, that's okay. But there is a difference between an instruction book in our mind and a masterpiece that comes from when two or more are gathered, when it is me and the Spirit divine working in partnership and collaboration to fully create this beautiful vision and dynamic life that I'm holding in mind. Waiting for the door, knowing the door is going to open and I'm going to walk through. Right? Yeah. So we pray, we let go, we listen. And when I was coaching this person on that, and we didn't have a lot of time, so I wasn't really able to get to the bottom of what might be some blockages to feeling the divine or even inviting the divine into this experience. I came up with this example that I'm going to share with you today, and it's the example of, has everybody in here seen the first Star Wars? A long time ago. In the 1970s, first Star Wars. And in the end of that movie, and I'm pretty sure it's the first one, right? Where he's shooting the thing into the Death Star and he's got to make it and he's going down the thing. And Obi-Wan Kenobi was speaking to him. Because, he was watching that radar thing and he was waiting for it to line up so he could push that button. And it did once and he pushed the button and it didn't make connection. And so Obi-Wan said, "Trust the Force, Luke. Trust the Force." And so he clicked the button and he disengaged from his radar. And the folks at home control was like, "Well, Luke, you disengaged your radar. What's the matter?" And he's like, "I got it. It's cool. I got it." Because that's kind of what happens in life too, right? When we disengage from the radar, we trust Force, people around us start freaking out and saying, "Oh, yeah, it happened." But Luke's like, "I got this." And so he went within and he surrendered from his mind connection and the panels and the electrical, mechanical stuff, and he connected to the Force, which we all know is the divine, right? And then he was able to make the perfect shot. But you see, something has to take place for us to have that connection occur, and we have to surrender. We got to jump over the fire with faith. And that's what Luke did. Right? So life will continue to lead you down the paths that will encourage you sweetly and sometimes force you to get in touch with the divinity within. When you don't have a choice, you've got to surrender to Spirit and you know that everything turns out okay. Hasn't it always? Hasn't it always turned out okay when those times have happened in your life, when you've been forced to spiritually surrender? It reminds me of a time in the early 2000s. I was completing my internship as a chaplain at the Bayfront Medical Center, and it was my first day on the job as the chaplain of the hospital. And what happened that day in labor and delivery on the 5th floor is a severely mentally challenged woman gave birth to a stillbirth baby boy. And she was at the point where she was mentally challenged to the point that she did not understand that the boy was not alive, that the baby was not alive. And so she was operating from an energy that was different from the truth and the reality that was showing up for her. And she wanted me, now he was all wrapped up in blankets, and she needed me to hold him during the whole time that I worked with her, and it took all day. And now I can tell you, there was no part of my training that prepared me for this. None. There just isn't. But I can tell you what did, and that was surrendering to Spirit, going into prayer. Guide me, God. Allow me to be in service for this beautiful, beautiful being that even in this moment doesn't understand completely what is going on. but needs to be moved to the energy of release and surrender and letting go. And she did, eventually. But it needed to be in her time, and it needed to be in a space where she felt comfortable enough to release and let go and allow her healing to continue. Now, there's an area of forced spiritual surrender. I could not be in my intellectual position at all through that experience. There was no textbook I could go to and look up and say, okay, what do you do when this happens? You got to spiritually surrender when that happens and go with what you're feeling and go with that divine guidance. How many of you have had an experience in your life where you've needed to do that? Right, right. You know, there's those times when you just say, God, you got this, and I'm going to step aside, and I'm going to be open, and I'm going to listen. And then there's other times when it comes up, and I tell you, it never ends. You know, I got a million stories in my life that I could share with you, and one is super fresh for me. You guys all know that we just recently adopted an 8-year-old puppy dog, right? Rumi, you want to show that picture? I'm really into visuals, so here's Rumi. He's absolutely adorable, but he's 8 years old. I've never had an adult dog come into my life. I've always trained my dogs as puppies. Whole different experience here with Rumi. Rumi's very well behaved. He's very well trained. Unless he gets away from you and you're calling him. Then he becomes very not well trained. And some of you may know, and some of you may not, that I just recently discovered, and I'm not really putting a lot of energy into this because I know that everything in the mind of God is healed, and I'm working on that. But I have exercise-induced asthma, which means when my heart rate gets up and I run or do anything like that, the alveoli and the bronchioles in my lungs close up immediately and I can't get any oxygen, so I can't breathe. I try to breathe, but I can't breathe, and it happens when I take off. Well, yesterday, I'm giving you a little brief story on spiritual surrender, okay? Yesterday, and I'm getting used to this. You know, I've always had dogs that voice commanded. I never had to have leashes on my dogs. Rumi is different. And I was getting everything I needed to take him for a walk yesterday, putting everything in my pockets, you know, poop bag, this, that, you know, and whatever. And I thought I had it all, and I opened the door because, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I got everything I need, except I didn't leash Rumi, right? I mean, I opened the door, Rumi's looking at me, he looks at the door and he takes off. He's like, cool, Mom, I get to go for a free ride. And then it dawns on me, and he gets down to the bottom of the steps and he turns around and looks at me, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't put the leash on him. Now, this happened once before. You guys remember, it happened on a Sunday morning a few weeks ago. Well, I thought, okay, I'm not gonna let him know that I'm a little freaked out about this because that's going to make him run. So I'm like, Rumi, come here, Rumi. Come on, baby, come on. And I go down the stairs, and he takes off. And so what he did was he took me on a really hilarious adventure through our housing complex where he would let me get just close enough to him where he would take off again. Now, I am running after this dog, and I cannot breathe. I did not have my inhaler on me, and I ran all over that complex because I thought, oh my God, he's going to get away from us. You know, all those things that go through your mind in that moment. He's going to get away, and he's, you know, I'm trying not to chase him towards the main road, but he's heading that way anyway, and he's heading towards Meadows Boulevard. I'm like, my God, he cannot get on Meadows Boulevard. So I'm running, and I'm running, and I'm running. And then I see this group of girls playing, about 8 years old to 10 years old. And I'm hollering out because every now and then I'm trying to keep him in my eyesight because he'll dart up and down, and I got to know what direction to run in when I get there because it's taking me a while to get there. And so I get up into this vista here, and I holler out to the girls, did you see a little brown dog? Yeah, he went towards Meadows Boulevard, and it's like right at the entrance. And I'm like, I said, Spirit said, ask them for help. because I'm praying by this time. I'm breathing and trying to breathe and pray. And so I said, hey, will you guys help me? He said, he's really nice. He's really good. He doesn't have a mean bone in his body. So if you are able to get him to come to you, just hold on to his collar, because I got to go get my car, because I'm far enough from home now that I need to go get the car. And it took me forever to get back to the car because I could not breathe. So I get into the house and I'm finding my inhaler and I take a few breaths and I'm like, okay, I've got to surrender. I got to surrender. All these thoughts, all this worry is not serving me in this moment. So I just took a moment, got to the point where I could breathe, got in my car, and drove down there. And what I see are these precious 5 young girls. And one of them's carrying Rumi. He's got his legs up in the air, and she's carrying him like a baby. And Rumi's like, and I was like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I had to surrender to that experience. And what I got from it was some wonderful connections now within our neighborhood. A dog coming back to me without me needing to lose a lung to catch him again. And it was a beautiful thing in the end. It wasn't necessarily a beautiful thing during it. But I know that you get what I mean when I'm talking about that spiritual surrender. Moving into treatment, surrendering, knowing that I alone am not able to catch this dog. But me partnering with Spirit can do anything. Right? And and I get that might be like a little trivial example, but it's real, and it happened to me yesterday, and it was an opportunity for me to truly surrender. Nothing like adopting an 8-year-old dog to teach you spiritual surrender on an almost daily basis. And so there's something that happens. Jonathan Lockwood Huey says miracles are the natural way of the universe. Our only job, now I want you to hear this, our only job is to move our doubting minds aside and let the miracles flow. Now what is our only job? To move our doubting minds aside, to surrender, and then let the miracles flow. I could have never dreamed it was possible for one of those little girls to just carry Rumi back to my car. And they were just adorable. I mean, I had a powerful posse of dog-finding energy there that I could have never done on my own. So it was awesome. So James Rouse, who is an exceptional doctor, nutritionist, speaker, he and his wife were one of our visitors and speakers at our conference this year, the Centers for Spiritual Living Conference. And they're going to be coming here and speaking soon. But I have a little short video. It's two minutes. But I love how he explains this, because what happens, folks, is when we are actively growing through service, when we are following what James Rouse talks about as our element, when we live in our element, and that is when we move towards that which we're being drawn to move towards, like the horseback riding, volunteering, and the teaching adult literacy, and all of those things. Those seeds are planted within us on purpose, because there's something greater taking place, and the world needs each one of us individually to sprout our seeds. And so James talks about when we're living in our element, when we're actively growing through service, and we surrender, we spiritually surrender and let go and let God, at this intersection, big fireworks take off. And that's what we're talking about this month, and that's what we're kicking off here in our community this month. And I'd love to have James share a little bit about that for you. So covert operation, I know we talked about moving into the weekend, but I'm inviting you to go into this covert operation for a week. Live in your element, folks. Like he had said, the second and third degrees. What's going on right now in Rocky Mountain National Park? Who can tell me? Rocky Mountain National Park, what's going on? Okay, well, yeah. What are they celebrating right now? 100 years, right? 100 years of being a national park. It's the centennial celebration with Rocky Mountain National Park. Who is Enos Miller? Anybody know who Enos Miller is? Okay, Enos Miller, at 14 years old, his family came west, and he set foot on the land that is now Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park. And his life came alive. That land meant so much to him. And then he had a brief encounter with John Muir. And that brief encounter with John Muir and that passion and what has come alive within him and being in that land was his element. And he surrendered to Spirit. He's the one that got that as a national park status. His third attempt. He lobbied Congress. He wrote the materials. He sent it in. He's the father of Rocky Mountain National Park, Enos Mills. And he got that idea and he was ignited with that spirit at 14. That's what James is talking about. He actively grew through service by listening to his passion and applying it to it and surrendering to Spirit to it. But look at what we all gained from that. And so I just wanted to show you how that ripple effect takes place when we do that. And I know I'm like going fast because I'm running out of time here, but you guys are following that, right? Giving Enos an example of what he did. 100 years, national park. Who's to say it would have happened anyway, or who's to say it would have happened at all without him? Who's to say anything that we impact in our lives would have happened if we were not here, being in our element and surrendering to Spirit? Remember what Jim Carrey said. The effect that you have on others is the most valuable currency that there is. The effect that you have on this planet, the effect that you have on others, the effect that you have on the people in this center and people in this community, the people worldwide, is the most valuable currency that there is. So I am inviting us as we move into this covert operation this week, move into our element by surrendering to Spirit and allowing what is passionately driving us to intersect, to allow that to come alive, and to allow that to come alive in service, whatever that might look like, because we grow through that, and it's a beautiful thing. So thank you. We're going to move into song now.